Shane Dawson is a YouTube pioneer. He is someone who has been around this platform for an age now, and he's always managed to change up his content and maintain some form of relevancy throughout the years. And personally speaking, I've never been a huge fan of the guy. Sorry, but he just wasn't for me for all the about 3 remaining Shane Dawson stands. I was too busy out there watching KSI and AA9 Skills. And even through Shane's evolutions, even into his documentaries, it's just not fun to watch. So unlike F the Prom, which is directed by the Fine brothers but doesn't feature them exclusively on the screen, or Laid in America, where KSI is the star and is an actual good entertainer that could carry it, something like that, I actually had no connections to anyone that appears in this movie, and that made me all the more reluctant to sit down and watch it. And goddamn, this movie's bad. So while Shane Dawson is out here making headlines for all the wrong reasons lately, let's take a look at one of his greatest failures, and let's talk about not cool. So this movie starts off with a party sequence, which automatically for me brings the rating down. We pan through and see some of the most cliche party tropes of all time throughout the house, with a few intermittent shots of people taking out their phones and going on Twitter, tweeting the most bland and redundant stuff. You may say what I'm about to say next is a bit of a nitpick, but whenever anyone's typing, they're tapping all over the screen. They're not tapping the keyboard, they're tapping everywhere. And fair enough, I reckon it would be a fair statement to say that I'm being nitpicking and biased here. But when you put the phone right in the center of the shot, it's next to near impossible for me to forget. And we're not even a minute into this film. This goes for the whole movie, but the writing is literally just a whole lot of caricatures of what older people imagine teenagers to be, like F the Prom levels of screenwriting, rather than actually having, people and characters and people go through arcs and change. Instead, they're just busting out some of our favorite slang phrases, like unironically saying totes. Not to mention the emphasis on ass in this scene. Like, that's not a joke. The opening shot of this movie is a woman's ass. Sick. Funny. Cool. Awesome. Epic. I'm sure all the 14-year-olds are absolutely riled up now. Who freaking directed this? Who directed this movie? Like, this is actually pathetic. There's not one good shot throughout the... Oh, it was Shane himself. Okay, that makes sense. So, this whole scene is done to set up our apparent lead protagonist, Tori Vega, who is meant to be our, outcast, introverted lead, which, as I'm sure you're very well aware from a lot of these YouTuber movies, never, ever works. Now, it seems as though the idea for this film was to have this girl, Tori Vega, or whatever her name is, be the girl who the film revolved around and was focused on, and we could actually see her grow and change. But instead, about halfway through the first act, Shane Dawson is introduced, and then he immediately becomes the main character. I think Shane's just, with his massive ego, loved to push himself right into the front and center, and being the director, I don't think he had anyone around to tell him that he was a hack and that everything he was doing was completely pointless, because it's Shane Dawson. He's the moneymaker here, and he's gonna line our pockets. As I'm sure you're aware from the most recent Fred review, if there's one thing I despise in these movies, it's gross out humor. And for the most part, that is the main center of the humor throughout this entire film. That's our big punchline. Throwing in a poop, fart, puke, etc. joke, none of them will ever land, especially for this film, which is an 18s film. two more gripes I have with this, and I'm sure you can tell why one of them is especially annoying to me now after watching 3 Fred films, but for some reason all the actors decide to scream their dialogue at the top of their lungs. Well, I doubt they choose, because I don't think anyone realistically ever wants to choose to scream for the weeks you were probably in production for this film. I'm just assuming Shane thought it was funny that every character is a completely loud, obnoxious dickhead that is so painful to listen to for the duration of the film. Even more so, I'd argue, than Fred. Do you realize how much that takes to be more annoying than Fred? And that's about 90% of the characters in this film. Another gag that Shane seems to find funny, and I say Shane because even though he's not apparently a writer here, he clearly chose himself. He likes to cross-dress and play two of the most despicable, unfunny characters that completely rely on the gross-out humor I mentioned earlier. Like, every character in this film is completely despicable and irredeemable and a complete and utter knob that I hope will die. But, like, in all these scenes, he likes to completely interrupt the flow of the scene just so he can have a funny joke, because you can be like, "Ha, look, it's a man in women's clothing being disgusting and a knob." Like, we'll just have two characters having a random, albeit somewhat normal conversation, and then Shane Dawson's out here trying to be Siobhan Fallon Hogan. The whole thing, this whole film, is a complete embarrassment. Like, there's not a whole lot else I can say about this movie I haven't already said. Like, every single sentence said by any character seems to have some form of innuendo thrown into it. Like, it's just hopelessly immature. So, the plot is awful. Basically, Tori Vega, loser from high school, returns home. Cool kid, Shane Dawson, who's not left, is now not cool. They fall in love, wacky antics ensue, that's it. Not gonna go into any more detail, because it's not worth it. This movie is genuinely not worth me wasting my breath, other than just to take it off the list of YouTuber movies that I reviewed. Every character, much like the Fred films, is completely one-dimensional, all of which have only one trait. One. Tori hates everyone and everything, and that's it. That's basically her entire character. She doesn't really grow or change or end up being more caring and compassionate by the end of the film. She's pretty much the exact same at the start as she is at the end, and doesn't go through any real character growth or change. Shane Dawson is a top shagger who's extremely good looking, and everyone wants him, and he has everyone fawning over him, and he is a really big willy, and you can tell who had creative control over this movie. This is 100% going to wind up being the shortest review I've done so far, because honestly, I have no idea what to say. At least the Fred films, there was something there buried under this mound of absolute horse manure, and while it wasn't good in the slightest, I was at least not in a complete comatose state. I was at least able to be like, that's a good point I could bring up and cut and write my script. This film just meanders and gets to an ending that nobody gives a toss about, because all we've got is just a bunch of asshat characters that don't grow or change or have any characteristics that we can get attached to. And the fact that this film was basically the complete creation of a YouTuber does nothing but drag down the actual talented people on this platform that are funny and talented and have something to say. This movie is honestly, I'm not even being sarcastic here, it's worse than any of the Fred films in my eyes. It's absolutely terrible. Get out of here.
Yeah, going 8 like nigga. Move out the way, please don't be a hero. Bling, blow, ooh, she no skateboard P. Bling, blow, ooh, she no skateboard P. Yeah, going 8 like nigga. Move out the way. please don't be a hero. Bling, blow, ooh, chain on skateboard P. Ooh, bling, blow, ooh, chain on skateboard